Hello, third period, and this is your audio recording for your homework due May 1st. This is paid. So this is like the first set. I'm doing this in three segments as it says on your homework. This is pages 122 to 127. This is pages 122 to 127. So pages 122. Start there. Nothing there either. He was about to pass him through when, for safety's sake, he crushed the mitten that Shukov held out to him, the empty one. The guard crushed it in his hand, and Shukov felt as though pincers of iron were crushing everything inside him. One such squeeze on the other mitten, and he'd be sunk. The cells on 9 ounces of bread a day and hot stew 1 day in 3. He imagined how weak he'd grow, how difficult he'd find to get back to his present condition, neither fed nor starving. And an urgent prayer rose in his heart. "Oh Lord, save me. Don't let them send me to the cells." And while all this raced through his mind, the guard, after finishing with the right hand mitten, stretched a hand out to deal with the other. He would have squeezed him at the same moment if Shukov had held them in separate hands. Just then the guard heard his chief, who was in a hurry to get on, shout to the escort, Come on, bring up the machine works column." And instead of examining the other mitten, the old guard waved Shukov on. He was through. He ran off to catch up with the others. They had already formed fives in a sort of corridor between long beams like horse stalls in a market, a sort of paddock for prisoners. He ran lightly, hardly feeling the ground. He didn't say a prayer of thanksgiving because he hadn't time, and anyway it would have been out of place. The escort now drew aside. They were only waiting for their chief. They had gathered for their own use all the firewood the 104th had dumped before being frisked. What the guards had removed during the frisking itself was heaped near the gatehouse. The moon had risen still higher. The cold grew keener in the pale, bright night. The head guard walked to the sentry house. He had to get a receipt for the 463 prisoners. He spoke briefly to Prikov, Volkovoy's deputy. "K460, shouted Prikov. The Moldavian, who had buried himself deep in the column, drew in his breath and went over to the right of the corridor. He was still hanging his head and his shoulders were hunched. "Come here," Prikov ordered, gesturing for him to walk around the column. The Moldavian did so. He was ordered to stand there, his arm behind his back. That meant they were going to charge him with attempting to escape. They'd put him in the cells. Just in front of the gates, right and left of the paddock, stood 2 guards. The gates, 3 times the height of a man, opened slowly. The command ran out. "Form fives! No need here to order the Zeks back from the gates." All the gates opened inwards into the zone. Let the Zeks mass as they wished and push against the gates from within. They wouldn't be able to break. First, second, third. It was that evening recount on their return through the gates that the prisoners, freezing and famished around the icy wind hardest to bear, a bowl of thin cabbage soup, half burned, and as well as welcome as rain to parched earth. They swallowed it in one gulp. That bowl of soup, it was dearer than freedom, dearer than life itself, past, present, and future. They passed through the gates, those Zeks, like soldiers back from a campaign, brisk, taut, eager, cleared the road for them. For a trustee with a soft job at staff quarters, those prisoners on the march must have been something to think about. After the recount, a prisoner became a free man again, for the first time in the day since the guards had given them the morning signal for roll call. They passed through the big gates of the zone, through the small gates of the intermediate zone, through 2 more gates on the parade ground, and then they could scatter where they liked. But not the squad leaders. They were caught by the officer who assigned them their work, all squad leaders to the planning office. Shukov rushed past the prison, between the barracks to the parcels office. Cesar, meanwhile, went at a dignified, even pace in the opposite direction to where people were swarming around a pole with a board nailed to it. On it was the name of anyone for whom a parcel was waiting, written in indelible wood. Most writing in the camp was done on plywood, not on paper. It was sure somehow more reliable. The guards and turnkeys used wood, too, for keeping tally of the Zeks. You can scrape it clean for next day and use it again. Economical. Zeks who stayed in camp all day can, among other odd jobs, read the names on the board, meet people you've got as a parcel as they come in from work, and give them the number. Not much of a job, it can earn you a cigarette. Shukov ran to the parcels office, a little annex to a barracks, to which in turn a small porch had been added. The porch had no door and was open to the weather. All the same, it was cozier that way. It had a roof, after all. A line had formed along the walls of the porch. Shukov joined it. There were some 15 ahead of him. That meant over an hour's wait to just before locking up time. And there were others who'd be behind him in the line, the Zeks of the powerhouse column who had gone to look for their names on the board, and the machine works column too. Looked as though they would have to come again tomorrow morning. People stood in line with the little bags and sacks. On the other side of the door, Shukov himself hadn't ever received a parcel at this camp, but he knew from gossip guards opened the parcels, which came packed in wooden boxes with hatchets. They took everything out and examined the contents. They cut, they broke, they fingered. They tipped things out from one container into another. If there was anything liquid in glass jars or tins, they opened them and poured it out, though you had nothing but your hands or a cloth bag to hold it in. They didn't give you the jars. They were scared of something. If there was anything home-baked or tasty sweetmeats or sausage or smoked fish, the guard would take a bite at it himself. And just you try to get high and mighty and complain, and they'll immediately say that this and that are forbidden and won't issue them to you at all. Every Zek who got a parcel had to give and give, starting with the guard who opened it. And when they had finished their search, they didn't give you the stuff in the box it had come in. They just swept everything into your bag, even into the skirt of your coat, and off you go. Sometimes they'd whisk you out so fast you'd be sure to leave something behind. No good going back for it. It wouldn't be there. When he was in Ush-Izma, Shukov had got parcels a couple of times, but he wrote to his wife that it was a waste. Don't send them. Don't take the food out of the kids' mouths. Although when he had been at liberty, Shukov had found it easier to feed his whole family than it ever was to feed himself now. He knew what those parcels cost. He knew too that his family wouldn't be able to keep it up for 10 years. Better to do without them. But though he decided that way every time someone in the squad or close in by the barracks received a parcel, which was almost every day, his heart ached because there wasn't one for him. And though he had strictly forbidden his wife to send him anything, even for Easter, and though he never thought of reading the list except for some rich squad member, every now and then he felt himself longing for someone to run up and say, Shukov, why don't you go for your parcel? There's one for you. But no one ran up. He had less and less to remember Timjinovo and his home there. Life in camp wore him out from reveille to bedtime, with not a second for idle reflections. Now as he stood among men who were buoying themselves up with the hope of soon digging their teeth into bits of salt pork, or spreading butter on their bread, or sweetening their mugs of tea with lumps of sugar, Shukov had one wish only, to reach the mess hall in time and to eat his stew hot. It was only half as good when it was cold. He figured that if Cesar's name hadn't turned up on the list, he would have gone back to the barracks long ago to wash. But if he found it there, he would now be collecting bags, plastic mugs, and a basin. That would take him 10 minutes, and Shukov had promised to wait. There in lunch, Shukov learned some news. Again, there wasn't going to be a Sunday this week. Again, they were going to steal one of their Sundays. He, like everyone else, had expected it. For there happened to be 5 Sundays in a month, they gave them 3 and made them work the other 2. Shukov had expected it, but when he heard it, a spasm of pain caught his heart. Who wouldn't begrudge the loss of that sweet day? Though what they were saying in the line was right, they knew how to keep them jumping even on Sundays. They'd invent something, fixing up the baths, or building a wall somewhere, or cleaning up the yard. There were mattresses to be changed and shaken, bed bugs in the bunk frames to be exterminated, or they'd had the idea of checking you with your photo, or of carrying out an inventory, turning you with all your things into the yard, and keeping you there half the day. Nothing seems to make the authorities madder than Zeks napping quietly after breakfast. The line was moving, though slowly. People were coming in and shoving into the head of the line without even a pardon me, just elbowing to the front, a camp barber, a bookkeeper, a man who worked in the CED. But they weren't rank and file. They were respectable trustees, pigs of the first order with soft jobs in the camp. The Zeks who worked outside thought them lower than blank. A raiding the trustees returned. But it was futile to protest. The trustees were a gang of their own and were also installed with the guards. Now there were only 10 ahead of Shukov. Another 7 had hurried in to line up behind him when Cesar, stooping, appeared in the doorway wearing the new fur hat that had been sent for him from outside. Now take that hat. Cesar must have tickled someone's palm to get permission for wearing a town hat so clean and new. They even robbed others of their bedraggled service hats. Here, wear the camp big fur model. A strange-looking fellow with glasses was standing in line, his head buried in a newspaper. Cesar at once made for him. Aha, Pyotr Mikhailich. They bloomed like a couple of poppies. The strange-looking fellow said, look what I've got. A fresh Vikora. So that's an evening newspaper. They sent it by airmail. Really, said Cesar, sticking his nose into the newspaper. How on earth could they make out such tiny print in the glimmer of that miserable lamp? There's a most fascinating review of a Zavatsky premiere. Those Muscovites can smell one another at a distance like dogs. They sniff and sniff when they meet in a way of their own. They talk so fast, too, each trying to outstock the other. All right, guys, that's the end of the first segment. You have 2 more segments. Remember, you need 3 annotations. Follow the format in your notes. God bless you.